welcome to another Commodore 64 compilation comparison review, and today I'm going to be looking at a budget compilation from Atlantis Software. It's the Atlantis 4 Game Pack Volume 1. This was released in 1991 and had a retail price of £3.99. So let's take a look at that packaging in more detail, and then we'll take a look at the 4 games and see how this compilation shapes up. As with most budget compilations, this one's released in just a single cassette case, and it's pretty nicely presented. I think a nice colour scheme on the background there with the, I guess that's supposed to be the ocean with the whole Atlantis thing. Nice Atlantis logo at the top. And you've got the covers for the 4 games for the original releases: Superkid, Spooky Castle, Crossfire and Crack Up. Pretty nice artwork on those, very cartoony style and quite consistent looking. So yeah, also it just says 4 Game Pack in the middle of it. The spine, very boring, just says 4 Game Pack No.1. In fact, I don't know why I've turned it that way around, because it's that way around. Moving on to the back, we've got a screenshot of each game. So there's Superkid, Spooky Castle, Crossfire and Crack Up. 4 great all-action games on one tape, it says. Screenshots may be from a different version. I think we can pretty clearly see that's a Spectrum screenshot there, and so is that. But there's a couple of platform looking games at the top there, and also what looks like a sort of gallery shooter, and obviously a Breakout clone. So pretty varied range of games by the looks of things. So here's the cassette, and it's pretty bland. It's just a black cassette with the logo 4 Game Pack No.1 and Atlantis printed on it. Nothing on the other side of that. So let's move on to the instructions, and they're pretty bland as well. Very cramped as well. You've got all the instructions crammed into a couple of sides of the cassette inlay, and you've got load instructions. The instructions for each game, which I'm not going to go into in any detail, they're just printed very plainly, black text on a white background. More of the same there. So you've got pretty comprehensive instructions for each game, as comprehensive as they can be when crammed onto this inlay. There's really no space to breathe almost, but yeah, pretty decent instructions, and a backstory for each game as well. I guess they're good enough. They do the job, and that's all you can ask for really. Also, we've got some tape counter positions written on there by the previous owner of this cassette. As I've said before, I don't really mind that too much. A bit of copyright information, and of course it's illegal to back up or copy the software contained on this tape, but not that that actually ever stopped anybody. And also there's a little bit at the bottom there: if you've written a good program and would like to discuss marketing, please write to Atlantis Software. They were based in Sevenoaks, Kent. So that's it for the packaging. Pretty bland on the inside and the cassette, but I actually do like the design of the cover there. I think that's pretty nicely done. First up in this collection of 4 games is Superkid, originally released in 1990. The mayor of New York is desperate for help. Warring street gangs have turned his city into a no-go area for ordinary citizens, young and old alike. Someone is needed to protect these citizens from the violence of the gangs and make the city safe again. The mayor's call was answered by Professor Ian Stein, an eminent scientist who has dedicated his life to finding the secret of human flight. Yesterday, the professor's young nephew, Tom Essex, wandered into the laboratory and drank a complete bottle of the latest formula, mistaking it for a bottle of lemonade. The effect was instantaneous. Not only could Tom fly freely, but he also had amazing strength. Now he has a mission in life as a superhero who can clean up the city: Superkid. The city is split into 3 areas, each of which has a number of citizens to protect. Superkid must rescue young girls from the roofs of tall buildings, and senior citizens must be escorted safely back to the rest home. To kill the gang members, you must use your new superpowers to fly into them with your fists. Although your new powers do give you some protection, you can still die if you're shot too often. When the 3 areas of the city have been completed, you must enter them again, but this time in twilight. The gangs become even more vicious, and your superpowers will be tested to the full. First off, Superkid's a pretty good looking game with nicely drawn colourful backgrounds and detailed main characters that use high-res sprite overlays. The animation of the sprites is decent and everything moves smoothly. You're able to play the game with a choice of music or sound effects. The music gets repetitive and annoying very quickly, but the sound effects are pretty good and suit the game well. For the most part, the game is a simple collect 'em up affair in a fairly large flick screen environment. It's very easy to begin with, as the only thing that drains your health is bullets, and killing enemies restores it. There are only 6 levels, but it does get harder in the later ones, with more bullets, faster enemies and more people to rescue or protect. Gathering up the damsels in distress from the top of buildings is easy. The big problem is protecting the grannies as they slowly make their way back to the rest home. Each old lady has to make their way across several screens, and while doing so you have to block any bullets that are coming towards them and also protect them from any enemies. The problem is the enemies shoot faster than you can move, so quite often the pensioners will get killed before you can get in the way of the projectiles. On later levels, enemies move more erratically, so are more likely to hit the grannies directly, and annoyingly you can also kill them if you make contact with them, which can get really frustrating. After completing each level, you'll go into a bonus stage where you can rack up loads of extra points. It's a nice addition, but just like the main game, it soon gets quite repetitive. There are a few interesting quirks to the game. For one thing, enemies can kill each other, which can come in quite handy at times, but one thing that really stands out is some of the girls you have to rescue just hovering in mid-air, which is surely a bug. Also, after the first couple of stages, bouncing eyes are introduced as enemies, which are an odd addition to an otherwise human-based game. While it's far from outstanding, Superkid's nicely presented and reasonably fun for a budget title. It's just lacking some variety in the gameplay and things like power-ups that could have made it a genuinely good game. Next up is Spooky Castle, also originally released in 1990. Deep in the heart of Spooky Castle, the beautiful Princess Claire has been imprisoned by evil ghosts. King Michael has promised her hand in marriage to anyone who can save her. As Gormless Gary, a peasant of limited intelligence, you've volunteered to undertake this dangerous task. Your journey through the castle is fraught with danger. Each of the rooms is locked, rabid bats will sap your energy and the slightest contact with fire will kill you. It's also fatal to touch one of the evil ghosts. To aid you in your quest, there are keys to open the doors, the occasional cross to give you extra lives, and some potions to increase your energy. The difficulty level on this one is insane, with pixel perfect jumping and timing needed and brutal collision detection. I ended up using an infinite lives cheat just to get more footage of the game because I can't get past the first few screens. Just being in the general vicinity of a ghost kills you, and you can't seem to jump over them unless you're moving. While the bats only drain your energy, the ghosts kill you instantly and appear with random intervals between them, so sometimes it's easy to avoid them and other times it's completely impossible. It can be quite hard to move up and down the ladders, and you can get stuck at the top of some of them due to poor level design, so then you'll get killed by the ghosts homing in on you. It does seem like there's a strategy to completing each screen, but the randomness of the enemies makes it hard to execute consistently. Sometimes you'll get stuck in an area and have to backtrack, and when you do, all the doors are locked again, so you often have to trek back across a screen to get a key, only to then have to make your way back through the hazards to reach another door on the right hand side. As I made my way through the game with the cheat mode on, it also seems like screens seem to repeat after you get to a certain point. That's possibly lazy game design, or it could be intentional to make it feel like you're stuck in a maze. The game's got fairly good graphics, the backgrounds are pretty nice and the animation's good, but the sound effects are very basic and there's no music. It could have been a half decent game if they just had the ghosts draining health rather than outright killing you, added more variety in the screen designs and improved the collision detection. As it is though, it's way too hard to be any fun and is just hugely annoying. Any game where you need a cheat mode to get past the first few screens is going to get short shrift from me. Let's move on then to Crossfire, which was originally released in 1991, the same year as this compilation. Presumably it came out a little bit earlier than the compilation did. The town and docks of old Chicago are in the grip of the mob, and as one of Chicago's bravest policemen, you've been chosen to lead the Untouchables, a crack squad of honest police officers whose brief is to return law and order to the city. With accurate shooting and ultra-fast reactions, kill as many of the mob as you can within the time available. If you're too slow or not accurate enough, then you'll be shot and lose one of your 3 lives. Clearing a screen will move you on to the next of 8 locations, each of which is more difficult than the last. Be wary of shooting innocent bystanders, which will seriously damage your score, but missing one of the mob could cost you your life. Well, it's not hard to see why this game ended up on a compilation so soon after its original release. It's a very simple single screen shooting gallery where you have to eliminate as many enemies as possible within the time limit. It's got ugly Spectrum-esque graphics, bland landscapes with garish colours and tiny monochromatic targets. There's no music on the title screen or in-game, and the sound effects are literally just gunshots when you fire. There's not even any noise when the enemies shoot you. It may take a minute or two to work out which of the targets popping up are enemies or innocents, but then it's just a matter of moving around and shooting the bad guys as quickly as possible. The first level's a pretty easy introduction to the game, but after that the crosshairs only moves just fast enough to get across the screen before you're shot, so it turns into an endurance and recognition test. Only 2 of the targets that pop up are bad guys, and based on the theme of the game they should be gangsters, but they look more like cowboys and balaclava clad terrorists, or maybe even ninjas? The scoring's odd too, as you get rewarded for shooting the bad guys and penalised for killing innocents twice, once in play and then again at the end of the stage when it tots up the bonuses. While it is functional, this is a boring game that will give you arm ache from repeatedly moving the joystick back and forth across the screen, and you'll probably only play it twice. Rounding out this compilation is Crack Up, originally released in 1989. Featuring 32 action-packed screens, the aim of the game is simply to destroy each wall of bricks and move on to the next level. But be warned, some of the bricks take more than one hit to destroy, while others can't be destroyed at all. When destroyed, some bricks will drop bonus power-ups which may help or hinder you, with effects such as catching the ball, doubling the number of balls, extending your bat, giving you lasers, or slowing the ball down. You've probably already worked this out, but this is a very straightforward Breakout or Arkanoid clone. It's got very simplistic graphics and sound, no music, and very basic presentation. The movement of your paddle is smooth and you have the ability to angle the ball, affect its speed and redirect it. It also moves quickly enough that the game's not too hard despite having a really wide play area. Just like Arkanoid, you do get power-ups dropped from time to time, but they're nothing special. In fact, they're exactly like the ones you get in Arkanoid, so no thought's gone into doing anything particularly interesting with the game. It's got the standard first level that's generic and boring, but after that it does get a bit more interesting with more inventive brick layouts and bricks that do take multiple hits to destroy or even can't be destroyed at all. Gameplay is pretty laborious and the scoring in the game is low, so there's not much incentive to play for a high score either. Crackup's perfectly playable but completely unremarkable compared to other budget games in this genre like Ricochet and Pulsoids, which were released much earlier than this. Let's move on to the ranking for this compilation then, and I think you can probably guess that the scores for these games are not going to be too good. Superkid's the standout title on the package, if you can call it that. It's got decent graphics and sound and is reasonably playable if a little bit repetitive, so I'm going to give that 6 out of 10. Spooky Castle's got a reasonably good premise, but it's just so damn difficult that it's no fun whatsoever, and I'm giving that 3 out of 10. Crossfire's ugly and boring, but it is more accessible than Spooky Castle, so I'm going to give it a slightly higher mark of 4 out of 10. And finally, Crackup's a by-the-numbers Arkanoid clone that's perfectly playable but utterly unremarkable, so it's going to get an absolute middle-of-the-road score of 5 out of 10. So moving on to the overall compilation rating, well, the packaging I thought was pretty decent with an attractive and colourful front cover and reasonably good instructions, so I'm going to give the packaging 7 out of 10. The score for the games averages out at 4.5, and in terms of value for money, well, it's 4 games for £4. None of them are particularly outstanding, but 3 of them would give you some fun for a small amount of time at least, so I'm going to give it a value for money score of 6 out of 10. All of which means that the overall score for this compilation is 53%. So those are my thoughts on the compilation, but what did the magazines think? Well, there was no review for this one from Zap, but Commodore Force reviewed it in November 1992, giving it almost 2 pages of coverage. It must have been a slow month for games, I suspect. So it was reviewed by their Roger Frames character in the budget section, with each game getting a write-up and a screenshot. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I'll just pick out a few select comments for each game. Oddly, they're reviewed in a completely different order to the way they appear on the front cover and the tape itself, but for Crack-Up, the most notable comment is, "It's marginally more fun than going down High Wycombe's main street dressed as a schoolboy in an attempt to con money out of gullible tourists. But if you're used to C64 games with complex graphics, decent sound and exciting gameplay, buy this compilation and use the Crack-Up part of the tape to record a karaoke version of Holiday in Cambodia by Danny Minogue." Yeah, whatever. For Superkid, it said it's not that brilliant. There are quite a few levels, it's got a good running speed and there are plenty of baddies to beat up, but ultimately it's really rather sad. The final word on Superkid was, "It's rather silly." Moving on to Spooky Castle, the review says it's like a poor man's Addams Family is Spooky Castle, but that doesn't mean it's very good. It isn't. Contradicting that somewhat and my own personal opinion of the game, it sums up by saying Spooky Castle is the best game on the cassette. It's diverting, it's a bit of fun, and it's big enough to keep you going for a while. And finally, the comments on Crossfire. Atlantis have chosen to call it Crossfire, but they might as well have called it sad drawings of houses with rubbish people occasionally popping up, because that's what it's all about. The review goes on to say it's by far the worst game on the cassette. When you look closer at this review, some of the detail it goes into is absolutely bonkers, but let's just go over to the summary for the game, which says, "If I may be permitted to sum up, my lord, here we have 4 guilty games. There can be no excuse for the notorious Atlantis 4. The only one not deserving of a life sentence is Spooky Castle. These are games which would make honest, right-thinking citizens put engine ports on their heads and hop around claiming to be the pre-tax prophets of the Church of the British Telecom." I mean, what the hell's going on there? And finally, just to round it up, it says, "Save your £4, invest it wisely, and in 770 years you'll be able to buy a helium-filled space hopper made on the very day of your birth." And the overall rating for the compilation was given at 36%. Needless to say, they weren't impressed. So that completes another disappointing budget compilation review. Let's see where it figures in my league table of compilations reviewed so far. As you can see, it's right near the bottom in 8th place, below Foremost Mega Heroes with the same score. The reason I've put it below Foremost Mega Heroes is simply because the average rating for the 4 games on this one was slightly lower. That brings this edition of the Commodore 64 Compilation Comparison to an end, and still we're looking for a really outstanding compilation. But what I can guarantee you is in the next edition of this series you're going to get one, because I'm going to break out one of the big guns from Ocean Software. If you've got any thoughts about the 4-game pack number 1 from Atlantis and the 4 games featured on it, then please let me know in the video comments. And as always, I'll be back with more retro gaming content in the near future. Thanks very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.